I know you're familiar with this. I have a draft opinion overruling Roe versus Wade by Clark Forsythe, and he credits you as somebody who provided some kind of commentary on this. I'm not sure what, but he has a fascinating document that was given to us about just basically disagreeing with this notion that on the basis of stare decisis is not, it's not. Anyway, what do you think of this? I'm curious. Your comments on this might have been telling him, Clark, that won't work. I don't know. He doesn't say whether you are for it or against it, but it's fascinating. It's something I think everybody in here ought to take a look at just to see, what the legal thinking is. But what do you think of this?
Well, I read that and reviewed that quite some time ago, so I'd have to try and reach back in my memory. I thought I was generally favorable about what he wrote. I can tell you he would not support this bill. I don't mean to be speaking for him when I haven't asked him about this specific bill, but I know how he thinks. I worked with him for 8 years at Americans United for Life, and I've been in contact with him frequently since then. AUL does not support this type of legislation as far as I know, and I like the approach he took in that article. I have a brief ready to be filed asking the court to overrule Roe. I'm publishing a law review article next year about the stare decisis analysis, which Mr. Mast referred to earlier. He made a very nice analysis of that, about why stare decisis should not preclude the court from reconsidering and overruling Roe. I agree with that, but I don't think we have the votes now. And the fact that the court has turned down all these abortion cases without dissent just reinforces that view on my part. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but...
Well, conceptually, yes. Specifically, no. And I think that, one of the things that's hard for us as legislators is this is not just a politicized issue. It's a politicized Supreme Court. In other words, there is, as the saying goes, everything is politics. Well, that's true of the Supreme Court, too. And when you look at or listening to the testimony from various individuals, you discover pretty quickly that, there's some dramatically different opinions as to what the Supreme Court would or would not respond to. And I think there's, people just have a political paradigm. They've watched the Supreme Court for years. They make it's like a fantasy football league. You know what I mean? It's like everybody's looking at all these justices trying to figure out how they're going to make a play. And the fact is none of us know. It's just a reasoned guess. And some people, like yourself, have far more experience than I do in terms of watching the court and making conclusions. But it's very hard for us as legislators. We don't want to. At least those of us that are in favor of this legislation don't want to sit by and do nothing. But at the same time, we also don't want to waste anybody's time. I've said this over and over again. We don't need to make a pro-life statement. This is the most pro-life General Assembly in the state of the nation, consistently. We don't need to make a statement. What we need to do is we need to do something that will be effective. And I don't care about winning a battle. I want to win the war. And that's and I'm not afraid to try something that's not been tried before, to Senator Bowling's point, but I want to be wise. I mentioned yesterday, what did Sun Tzu say? The successful warrior knows he's won before he goes to battle. I want to win this war, and I don't want to fool around, and I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I'm listening to experts say, you're wasting your time, or this is great, they've never considered it before, and I'm trying to sort out who to listen to. And it's tough. And then, so when I read something like this, it's a fascinating read. So,
if I could comment briefly on that,
please.
Mr. Chairman.
Briefly.
Jim Bopp was referring yesterday to the long-term strategy to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. They didn't start out with a case that said public schools, elementary schools, must be integrated. That's not how they started out. They said, okay, separate but equal. Well, if they're going to be separate, they darn well better be equal. And they started out with professional education. If you're going to have separate professional schools for blacks and whites, they've got to be comparable. Because you said separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson. They started out with professional schools. They went to colleges and universities. What was the last step? elementary school. It was a progression. And we have not seen enough of a progression here in terms of whittling away at Roe. Yes, they rejected the trimester framework in Casey, but they adhered to what they call the central or essential holding, that regardless of whether or not exceptions are made for particular circumstances, the state may not prohibit abortion before viability. They haven't backed away from that. We need to see some signs of them willingness to cut around the edges and back off before we have, I think, a full frontal attack. Because in any case, if we have the 5 votes to overrule, they can do it in any case where an abortion regulation is at issue. They don't need a bill like this.